Hey everyone, I just wanted to say, hey, thanks for listening to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast. Wow, I cannot believe season 3, you guys. It's amazing to think this is the third year of this podcast, and I just wanted to say a quick shout out. Thanks for listening. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, if you got a nugget of wisdom, if you're enjoying this series or finding value in this podcast, get social, share it with your friends, take a quick screenshot, post it on social media, or maybe go online and do a review, because that's one of the things that helps get more people to be able to listen to it. So if you're finding value in this, then share it with your friends and your network, because we're all on this journey of getting better together. Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of Fearfully and Wonderfully Me. We are continuing this series on the elements of personal growth and transformation from my book, my new book, Fearfully and Wonderfully Me. And today's episode is all on the element of self-love, and specifically loving ourselves, loving myself, loving yourself, because we cannot reach our potential if we cannot first accept and appreciate and value who and what and where we are, and then develop it, right? I forget who is it that says to love yourself is to develop yourself. But if you don't love yourself, then number one, you're not going to be able to love anybody else, really, because we have to value who we are first. Wayne Dyer says, if you don't love yourself, nobody will. And not only that, you won't be good at loving anyone else. Loving starts with the self. And I think that's hard for us sometimes, because the first thing is realizing that loving yourself doesn't mean you're self-centered. So I want to be clear on the differences. Being self-centered means you believe the world revolves around you, right? You're at the center of the world. You're at the center of your world. And that's not a good place to be, because the world doesn't revolve around you. It doesn't revolve around me, right? It doesn't revolve around any one individual person. And so it's important to know that and understand the difference between loving yourself doesn't mean you're self-centered. It's not all about you, right? And I think most of us intuitively know that as we mature. Certainly there were times in life when if before we've grown and developed ourselves, I can think back to thinking, well, the world does revolve around me. I mean, not literally, but when I say that, thinking that the world revolves around you means, thinking everyone should do the things that you want to do, or everyone should do or say things that make you happy, right? And then we don't like it when people don't. And then growth comes from realizing that not everybody is going to do or say or be the things that we want them to be or do or say. And so it's okay. It's recognizing that we can grow through that and mature through that, and stop being selfish. Self-centered people view themselves as better than others. And sometimes they're just trying to hide their vulnerabilities and their insecurities, and they're unwilling or unable to empathize with other people or see things from other people's perspective. And this limits the quality of the relationship, right? It limits their success, because empathy is such a critical skill, and it limits the joy that they experience in life. Self-centered people really cannot experience the fullness of joy, of true joy, not just happiness or pleasure in the moment, but true joy, because most of that true joy comes from having internal peace and fulfilling our purpose in life. And you can't do that when you're self-centered, right? It's just a fact. You have to grow beyond that. So, self-centered people are really just arrogant. And Mac loves to say, there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. So when I say I want you to love yourself, I want you to be confident. I want you to love the person that you are, not because you're perfect, but because you are improving, because you are getting better. So be confident, but not arrogant. So the important thing is having a little bit of humility. Having a fine line between confidence and arrogance is humility. So be confident with some humility. And in that confidence, you'll find the ability to love yourself. It's the key is to be confident in who you are and humble enough to realize it's not about you. And to me, this goes back to being created fearfully and wonderfully by God and designed for a specific purpose, uniquely created and uniquely called into a purpose. And your greatest joy in life is when you discover that purpose and then live in a way that fulfills it. So, yes, love yourself. You are beautiful and special and incredibly gifted and smart, and God called us for a purpose, created us for a purpose. Love that. But realizing it's not about you. It begins in you, but it's not about you. So I want you to love yourself. You should love yourself. And you can't love yourself until you have a firm sense of self-worth. So if that's still a struggle, go back and listen to some of the previous episodes in this series where we talked about self-worth. Because if you don't believe you have value, you won't really love yourself enough to develop yourself and develop to your potential. And a big part of loving yourself is accepting the things that made you who you are. And I know that's the difficult part, and some of you are going to struggle with that because we do go through hard times and life is hard, and I'm sorry that you've had to face challenges, and I know that you have, because we all do. But it was a big step in my growth and my transformation when I realized that loving myself meant accepting what happened to me and the abuse that I experienced growing up, and making a peace with that. And I don't mean that you have to love the bad things that happen in life, but you do have to have a peace about that and just saying, you know what, it has happened and it's affected me. It's influenced me, but how it influences me is going to be my decision. And you really cannot love yourself until you can come to terms with the things that have shaped you in some way. I know it's hard to accept. But not only should we accept it, but we've got to appreciate the positive things that have come out of it. So, for example, I realized that going through that abuse, it's definitely affected me and influenced me in many ways. But something that's positive that's come out of it is I realize I'm a stronger person. I realize that overcoming that has given me a lot of mental fortitude or strength, whatever, grit, whatever you want to call it. And so that's one way that I can accept and appreciate the positive outcome, something positive that's come from that. So, and when we're able to do that, we take something that's bad or negative and we're able to turn it around into something more positive. And it's being able to leverage those terrible or traumatic experiences in a way that helps us produce something positive. Now, it's not easy to do. I know it's not easy to do. Trust me, it's always a struggle sometimes to remember to appreciate and look for the positives, even when we're going through a tough time. And sometimes you're like, there's no way that there's something positive in the situation. Like, Ria, there's no way that there's something positive that comes from losing a child to leukemia, for example. I get that, absolutely. And so, I think that's where I come back to. We don't always know why things happen, but when we trust God, when we make that decision, faith is a decision. And we don't always know the reason why bad things happen, but we know there is a reason. God doesn't cause the pain in our lives, but He can use it. And that is just a choice that we've made as Christians. We've already made the decision to transcend painful earthly experiences. We've already said, I'm going to take this on faith. And that's that's an individual choice, and I recognize that. And there may be some of you listening who aren't, you're not a person of faith, and that's okay. I absolutely respect that people have different beliefs. But to me, because I have faith in God, then it's easier to just say, you know what, I know that I don't always know the reason behind things, and I cannot grasp them all the time. But I know that there is a plan. And so I have confidence in that. So all that to say, yes, I'm sorry bad things happen, and I wish I could just take away all that pain, but I can't. And so part of developing our character is recognizing that yesterday is over. You can't change it. I'm sorry you've experienced terrible things in the past, or maybe you're still going through something. But know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, right? Tomorrow can look better than today. And I'm just living proof of that. But you've got to embrace those times of adversity, not because you enjoy them. Growth is never fun, and adversity is tough. And when you're going through something like that, it stinks, right? I mean, you're like, I'm living through this, and it's hard, and it's challenging, and I don't like it. And it takes courage to face it and accept it, and it takes courage to heal. We think of a lot of times of courage as something that firefighters have when they run into a burning building, and absolutely that takes courage. But it also takes courage to just step into who you are created to be every single day. It takes courage to look at some of the bad things that we've been through and say, you know what, that's influenced me. It's shaped me in some way, but it doesn't have to shape me in a negative way. I don't have to let this destroy the rest of my life. What you've been through is maybe a painful chapter in your life story, and maybe you don't want to read it again, and you don't want anyone else to read it. But it's only one chapter of the story. It's definitely not the rest of the story. And you've got to be brave enough in order to make the rest of the story the best of the story. You've got to have the courage to fight it and write a new chapter, and just say, you know what, that chapter is over, but today is a brand new blank page, and I'm going to write the rest of my story one choice at a time today. And I'm not always going to get it right. I'm not always going to make the right choices, but I'm going to make some better choices. And that's really what it comes down to, is just having that courage to say, you know what, I'm not perfect by any means, and that's okay, because I'm becoming better. And it takes work. There's no doubt. But don't be ashamed of who and what you are and what you've been through. Loving yourself and loving your story takes courage, because here's the thing: to really love yourself is to acknowledge that you have flaws and imperfections and past hurts and insecurities from these things. But when you love yourself, you're loving who that person is, even though you're not perfect, even though you have flaws, right? And it's okay. I kind of think it's realizing that when you own something you've been through, it doesn't own you. And that's so important. I wish I could just say that over and over and over again. When you own something that's happened to you, it doesn't own you. I'm reading a pretty good book by Ian Crone. It's called The Road Back to You. And it's all about Enneagrams. And if you've never heard of an Enneagram, it's basically a 9 category personality or a self-awareness tool, I think is the best way to put that. But what I really like about this book is when I started reading this book, and he talks about, who we are, our natural personality type, as we're growing up, as we're a child. And definitely there are things that shape us. And he talks about specifically one personality type that he calls a challenger personality type. And he said this person is often influenced early in life by growing up in a home that has, adversity or conflict, or maybe there's a lot of criticism. And so sometimes it shapes that personality in a way that they are a challenger. They don't mind conflict. They don't mind jumping into something and, taking on a challenge. And especially they like to, defend other people. So it was interesting as I started reading that, and he's talking about the things that influence us as we're growing up and how that contributes to our personality. And there's not a right or wrong or good or bad personality. We all have strengths and weaknesses, right? And then there's who we are on our good days, and then there's who we are when we're stressed, and we tend to run towards some less well-serving behaviors a lot of times when we're stressed. And so all that to say, I love things like this because, it's a tool, right? It's not the be-all end-all in recognizing ourselves or relationships with other people, but it's a lot about increasing self-awareness about who we are and about other people. And so it was kind of funny because the very first personality type that he discusses in the book was one of the challengers, but he did point out that a lot of times who we become is influenced by what we go through, as children. And that's not a newsflash, certainly. But there again, this is one of the better books I've read in a while that helps me think about who I am naturally, who I am on a bad day, who I am on a good day, what do I need to work on, right? Loving yourself means you got to understand who you are and where you are, because that's where you can start to grow. And I like reading things like this or learning things like this because every time I can get a nugget of information, it helps me remember next time I go through something, I can think about that. For example, he talks about the different personality types in relationships, and of course, Mac and I have completely different personality types, and that's not a surprise. We have known that since day one of our relationship. But it's interesting because when I read something in this personality type that I think is very close to Mac's personality type, or maybe his, it gave me just an understanding of where he's coming from. And so in our day-to-day interactions, a lot of times, it's natural. Any relationship, you're going to bump heads from time to time. And, we live, work, and travel together, or at least when it's not a pandemic. We have finally started traveling again. We spoke at a conference last week, so things are opening back up. We spoke at a conference in Florida, very socially distant. Everyone in the audience was spaced very appropriately 6 feet apart. Most of them were wearing masks. So we are starting to do a little more speaking and getting back to things opening up. But, when we spend a lot of time together. And so absolutely, when you live, work, and travel with someone, we're together so much of the time. There are going to be some bumps from time to time where you're just moving in the same space, so to speak. But this tool kind of gave me a little more perspective of what it's like to be his personality type. And so I can keep that more in mind as we go through our different day. And, that's being able to empathize with someone else's perspective and remembering that it's not about me. So my whole point here is that loving yourself means accepting yourself, but it also means developing yourself, right? So, but it starts with loving yourself. It starts with loving what helped influence you, what helped make you who you are. Not because it's all good things. In fact, I think a lot of times our personalities and who we are today was perhaps more influenced by bad things that happen, or traumatic experiences, or challenges that we've overcome. I think those, it's almost like those things influence us greater. Maybe because they impact us more. I mean, you tend to remember adversity and challenges more than you remember the good days, I think, because they stick out more in your memory, right? They impact you more because they were more difficult to go through. So I've kind of gotten on a little bit of a ramble there, but there again, back to my whole point when we started. Loving yourself is accepting what made you and influenced you who you are, and recognizing that you don't have to stay that person that you are today. You can grow, you can develop. It doesn't matter who or where you are. You have potential to improve. Like Michael Josephson's quote, you don't have to be sick to get better. There's nothing wrong with you. Love that. Love you. I love you. You should love you. But you don't have to be sick to get better. And loving yourself starts with the foundation for developing yourself and developing your potential. And we're going to talk a lot more about potential in next week's episode. So I don't want to get too far down that journey, because then we'd have a whole nother episode on it, and we would have to I'd totally be stealing from next week's episode. So loving yourself and loving your story, it takes courage, but be brave enough to acknowledge your flaws and imperfections, and don't be ashamed of where you've been and who you are. Be focused on improving it, right? It's okay to say, hey, I'm not perfect, but I'm working to get better. I'm not always going to get it right, but I'm working on it every single day. How can I get better today? And that's really what it comes down to, is if we just focus on that, just getting better 1%, one little tiny percent better today. What's one thing you can do today to get better, to grow in some way? And you're already doing it. You're listening to a podcast. So you could check the box on today. Here's something that you've done to get better. So be brave enough, be vulnerable enough to own your story. And in doing so, you discover the strength to overcome it. Until next time.